Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Jason Kersey, joined by Ryan Aber.
Let me have my spot back.
Well, if JD was available today, you might not be here. But, with Ryan in Kansas City last week, JD Runnels filled in, which was great just because of his perspective on all the SAE controversy. And we'll get into a little bit of that a little later. But I think first, obviously, we got to start with men's basketball. Ryan, you're heading to Columbus, Ohio here in a couple of days to cover the first round. OU a 3 seed, which I thought was a little high, honestly.
I was a little bit surprised. I thought going in, and I said this on Twitter, that I thought they would get a 4. But clearly the NCAA men's basketball committee liked the Big 12, really liked the Big 12. We talked about it all season, you and I a little bit, me and John Helsley, quite a bit more about the strength of this league, the strength of the Big 12, and clearly the basketball committee agreed because I thought the conference was given very favorable seedings.
I thought it was interesting, the rankings, the ones that I saw, the committee rankings. I think it was Kansas, Iowa State, Baylor, OU in that order. They just put them all right there in order at I think 8 through 11 or 12.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
So it was really interesting. But OU, I honestly thought it was more likely they get that they were going to get a 5 seed than a 3 seed. Frankly, I don't know.
I didn't see them really dropping below a 4 because of their body of work, how many ranked teams they beat this year, and obviously their the way that they finished in the conference. But I was skeptical about them getting a 3. Based on the losses to Iowa State late, and just some of the games that they had, and some of the statements that some of these other teams made that I thought might slide up into a higher slot.
Well, in terms of OU, I think the question that I sort of have about this team. And I don't cover them. I'm not at the games the way you are. I don't talk to the players like you do. What's going on with Buddy Hield? Because he still led the team in scoring the other night in the Iowa State loss, but I think 2 of 13 from 3, 6 of 20 overall. He's just not shooting the ball very well, and this is certainly not what anyone had come to expect from the Big 12 Player of the Year.
No, and I mentioned this in my game story the other night. Their last 10 games, he's had one where he shot better than 50%, and that's certainly a concern, given how good he was from three-point early in the season, how good he was, with range last season, and this year you figured maybe he'd be a little bit better because he was making more of a concerted effort to get to the bucket. I mean, we've seen that. We saw how the Kansas game ended.
Yeah.
What happens when he's able to crash the boards like that. His rebounding numbers have gone way up this year. But, I wonder if it's not a function of the kind of defense that they're playing, if that makes it more difficult for him to be as consistently productive on offense. Now, it is interesting that you look at the end of games he's really produced. I mean, in overtime a couple times when they've gotten that far, gotten pushed to the brink, he's come on and hit some big shots. He's hit obviously the big shot late against Kansas, the tip in, and other examples like that where he's really come on strong at the end of the game, which is encouraging. Except when you get into the NCAA tournament, you play better teams. It's sort of like I talked about Kentucky earlier and some of their struggles to put teams away in a different video we did. Talked about how maybe that could bite him in the NCAA tournament as they play better teams, don't have that ability to come back. I think the same thing with Buddy Hield. Maybe it's going to be a time where it's too little too late if he comes on strong at the end of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly would be a problem, particularly, like you said, in the NCAA tournament when you're playing better teams. They open with Albany. They should win that game. I did see one national writer pick Albany to win that game. Heck, it could happen. OU has struggled in the NCAA tournament, particularly under Kruger, but I got to believe that they're going to handle Albany.
Yeah, I really think they do. I mean, OU's guard play has been pretty strong overall. I mean, you mentioned Buddy Hield, and we talked about his up and downs, but he has been pretty solid on defense. And then two of their other guys, Isaiah Cousins and Jordan Woodard, they've been very good defensively as well. I think that they're going to do a good job of slowing down Albany's guards. Albany doesn't have near the strength inside. They've got a big guy. Their starting center, Richard Peters, was actually briefly committed to OU during the recruiting process back a long time ago when Jeff Capel was guiding the Sooners. But he's a 6'11" guy, but he doesn't contribute a whole lot offensively to them. I think Ryan Spangler and Tayshaun Thomas will be able to do some things, and they'll be able to get past that.
I'd like to say to our listeners, we apologize if you're hearing any weird noises. There's some sort of construction going on right outside of our podcast studio.
Feels like it's going on right underneath us.
So if you're hearing that, we apologize. Hope that's not too distracting. You talk about Albany. Once I saw who they were playing, I remembered seeing a story the day before. And then I went back, and it was right. Peter Hooley from Albany, fascinating story, really neat story. From Australia, missed a good number of games during the season, to be with his dying mother in Australia, and he hits the shot that allowed Albany to win the conference tournament and go to the NCAA tournament there at the end of the game. It was the only three-pointer they'd made the whole game. Really interesting story. I mean, have you? I guess how much have you looked at that, and how much can something like that propel a team forward? I mean, it seems to have worked so far.
Yeah, it certainly can. I mean, I following along with these conference tournament championship games. It's one of the funnest couple week stretches of the year as teams from smaller conferences are in the automatic bid. Albany and Stony Brook, I believe, had played a couple years in the championship game. Just an amazing story. It's probably the most inspirational story, I think, right now going into the NCAA tournament with Peter Hooley and the shot that he hit. Lon Kruger talked about it here. We're talking Monday morning. He talked about it on the Big 12 teleconference this morning that he saw it, when he was flipping around watching games and heard that and, really felt for the kid and was happy for the kid. And now they've got to face off against each other. So it's, one of these fun stories that happens in March. Usually they happen, when big-time upsets happen. Obviously, OU's got to be on alert for that, but they certainly can happen in these, play-in games to the tournament, virtual play-in games that smaller conference championship games are. And, we see another one in Georgia State and Georgia Southern. That game yesterday, Georgia State had a father and son coaching combination. The father, who was the coach, unfortunately blew out his Achilles in the celebration after the game, but was able to go on. Had to, use crutches to help get to the net, and then they actually lowered the basket for him to cut down the net since he couldn't climb up the ladder. But also, that team has Kevin Ware on it, who, last a lot of people saw he was writhing in pain after, that horrific broken leg that he suffered for Louisville. So just a lot of those kind of stories, and that's what makes March so fun.
And that's interesting because lately the NCAA has taken a lot of heat, and a lot of it deservedly so.
Absolutely.
There's been a lot of legitimate questions about the way players are treated, about how much money they make, about the fact that it's non-profit, but it's really a very profitable business. All of those things. I haven't actually watched it yet, but I both of us are fans of John Oliver. Last week tonight,
yes,
show on HBO.
I have to watch it.
I haven't seen it yet, but I know what it's about, and I know that he's going to look at it from a very, very negative perspective, and that's all fine. And that's I'm not saying that that's not deserved, but I think it's also important to remember the really cool things that this month presents in sports because of March Madness. Peter Hooley being one of them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And there's we've mentioned a couple of those stories, 2 or 3 of them, with a couple teams. And there's, every team really has something like that that people can look toward. And just a fantastic month. Looking forward to seeing what new storylines come out of these kind. And certainly it'll be a really fun NCAA tournament and should line up pretty well for Oklahoma.
We talk about Peter Hooley and the end of his conference tournament game, I think that's probably a good segue into Ryan Spangler and just the way that the Iowa State game ended the other day. How is he doing mentally? Have you had a chance to talk to him, and how do you think he's going to take this going forward?
Yeah, got a chance to talk to him a little bit yesterday during a press conference, and just sort of minor interactions, just saying hi to him yesterday before that. And I think Spangler's a kid who's going to bounce back from this. He was absolutely devastated Friday night in Kansas City when he missed that layup, and sort of felt like he had to hurry, I think, is what happened. Lost handle of the ball. I was actually sort of surprised that he was able to get it as close to going in as it did. But he was absolutely crushed after the game. His teammates really rallied around him, starting in the locker room with both what they said and their actions. And I think Spangler's going to be all right. This is a really good kid. We keep our biases out of it as much as we can, but there's players just from being around him that you really grow to like and grow to respect, and he's one. I think it's because of, one, the way he treats people, not only us and his teammates and people around him, but just everybody. Seeing him interact with him, he's fantastic. The way he works, both in practice and in games. I think, Buddy Hield is the MVP of this team and, the Big 12 Player of the Year. But Ryan Spangler is the heartbeat of the Oklahoma Sooners. And I think that he's going to be back and be fine, ready to go this weekend. But clearly that was a crushing moment for him on Friday in Kansas City.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, he seems like a guy that'll bounce back from it. I remember, I think I interviewed him probably once or twice when he was in high school at Bridge Creek. I can't remember what I was doing or anything, but I feel like I've talked to him before. But I thought he was a pretty impressive kid even then. Before he went to Gonzaga, I just remember him being a giant quarterback at Bridge Creek and how weird that was.
Yeah. Hey, he was a heck of a football player, and I know some people around here know that, but it gets lost in a lot of things.
Yeah.
But he had a heck of an arm and had an opportunity. I don't think he would have played at big-time D1 level, but certainly had an opportunity to continue his football playing career somewhere, and probably would have made a heck of a tight end as well.
Yeah, he may have another Dalton Wood type, Dalton Wood, Blake Bell type, big quarterback transition into tight end, and heck, OU could have used him on the gridiron last year.
No doubt about that. But OU's really glad to have him playing for them, and he's another great story this time of year. He went to Gonzaga because he wasn't recruited by OU and Jeff Capel. Really wanted to play for the Sooners coming out of high school. That didn't work out. Went to Gonzaga, really loved it there. Loved everything about Mark Few's program, loved everything about Spokane, except for the fact that it was half a country away.
Yeah.
And when Lon Kruger took over, some things came open. He wanted to come back home. He did it with Gonzaga's blessing, and just been a fantastic addition for this team.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He's been a difference maker for the Sooners. I guess switching gears, we probably need to spend a little time talking about the OU women. We're recording this on Monday early afternoon, so this will not
Selection Monday.
So by the time a lot of you listen to this, their position in the NCAA tournament will have already been announced. But I think it's pretty safe to say they won't be playing in Norman. Women's basketball has gone back to the top 16 seeds host the first two rounds. I think they had a really good shot if they could have gotten to the tournament final game and then played Baylor close. They didn't get to the tournament final last week. I don't think they would have played Baylor close if they had. And so here they are. I think they'll probably be a 5 or a 6 seed. Been a weird year for them, and I know you haven't followed them as closely as I have, but they start out 5-5, and I think a lot of people were legitimately thinking, I was one of them, this might finally be the team that doesn't make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah,
they were bad.
I don't think there's any doubt about it that a lot of people thought that they weren't headed in the right direction, but really turned it around. From your perspective, what is it that you think that finally got this program or this team specifically turned around? Was it Joya Carter's play early in the year? Was it Peyton Little, the way she came on, or was it something else?
Well, it was those two, no doubt about it. I mean, those two have made the biggest difference this year, and they've done it at different times. I would say Peyton Little has been the best player on the team consistently. Joya Carter's had games where she was really, really good and looked like she was going to be the next great OU women's basketball player. And then she will have games where she scores 2 points, and she'll have 3 or 4 of those in a row. And so it's been a weird year for her because she, when she came to OU, Sherry Cole was referring to her like Stacey Dale. She was saying that she reminded her of Stacey Dales in preseason practices before her freshman year, and then that didn't quite go that way. And then this year things started out bad, and she came on. She was their leading scorer for several games in a row. Really, sort of the biggest thing that pushed them into that 8-game winning streak early in conference season. But I think that her inconsistency has really hurt them. If they could have had more out of her more often, I think they might be in a lot better shape, and they might very well be a top 4 seed. I think the same thing about Kaylin Williams. When she is on, she's a difference maker. She's one of the best posts in the league at that point, but she'll have really good games, and then she'll have games where she sort of disappears for a while, or she gets into foul trouble. And I think that's been the most puzzling thing about this team is the lack of consistency, not team-wide, just with certain players. Every time you think one of these players has sort of pushed through and gotten onto the other side, they regress. And I think that's probably been one of the things that's troubled the fans of this team maybe more than anything.
So you've seen this team a lot down the stretch, and obviously, like you said a little bit ago, we don't know the bracket, and matchups are such a big part of March. But given that, what do you think their chances are of making it at least to the Sweet 16 and possibly playing back home in Oklahoma City?
Well,
if that's where they're...
That's the problem, is I just don't know if they'll be in that region. I think that if they had been... I think the fact that they're not a top 4 seed actually might help them get back to Oklahoma City just because of the way that they do things. But I don't know that there's any guarantee they're going to get to Oklahoma City or to a regional, because they can look so good and then they can look so bad. And Sherry Cole says a lot. Well, we're young, and I mean that's true a little bit, but Peyton Little's a third-year junior. I mean, this is her first year at OU, but she's a third-year junior. Joya Carter played as a freshman. She's a sophomore. Kaylin Williams is a redshirt junior, and Shireen Campbell's a senior. This is not – I mean, they may be young off the bench, but it's not like this team is all freshmen or anything. I mean, and the truth is Gabby Ortiz, the freshman point guard, the true freshman point guard, doesn't really play like it. She doesn't light up the stat sheet, but she really commands the floor well. I mean, it's very impressive, her ability to be a floor leader at such a young age. So I don't know that the youth argument works. I don't know that that's quite accurate.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like you said, we've talked about. I haven't followed this team quite the way you do, but I'm with you there. They've got plenty of players who have that experience. That, I mean, obviously this team beat Baylor. They're very talented.
Yeah,
it's just, can they put it together on any night?
I do think they've got to get some bigger players. They've got to recruit bigger players. It's been a problem for the last few years, really. Ever since Joanna McFarland was a senior, and then going into that next year. So a couple of years now where they've really lacked depth at the post, and they're going to have to get that fixed, because Texas, that's how Texas beat them in the Big 12 tournament. They just were bigger, and they just sort of beat them up inside, and it killed them. So they're going to have to improve there.
Let's move on to football. Last week was an interesting week. I was here for the early part of it, missed the second part of it, but probably, and we've had a lot of them over the last year, but probably one of the strangest stretches to be around the Oklahoma football program.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. It's definitely been really weird because, with the other stuff that you sort of are referencing, Dorial Green Beckham, Joe Mixon, Frank Shannon, none of those things affected them practicing. I mean, they have not practiced. They practiced once for spring, going into spring break. I think they're going to have enough time to make up all their practices, but I think that's an issue that they're going to have to at least consider. So it has been weird. I don't blame them for skipping practice. I get it. I've said a million times on Twitter, and I've said it I think I may have said it on this podcast with JD last week. I have no idea what it's like to be called that word. I have no idea how it feels to hear that word. So I'm not going to try to pretend like I can understand that. However, skipping the second practice and doing a second silent demonstration felt a little strange.
Yeah, I was all right with him not practicing Wednesday because I really didn't see the point in them practicing Wednesday and then, taking off for a week and a half before they came back.
Yeah.
But having the Thursday demonstration, I mean, they could go to other campus events. They could, just have a press conference where those players were able to talk. Obviously, Eric Stryker's been very outspoken about this, and I think other than that initial Snapchat video, I think Eric Stryker's been phenomenal as a spokesman for this. But you could have had him, Ty Darlington, Zach Sanchez, Charles Tapper, those guys who have really made it a point to be, sort of the face of the OU football program through this, even on the basketball program. Frank Booker was such a big part of things. And, I even asked Booker about this in Kansas City last week, and he said he thought it was time for them to get back to practice and, let the process play out, whether it's through, David Boren with his dealings with the fraternity or with Joe Castiglione and David Boren trying to work to, get the athletes feel like they're represented on campus in the way that they feel is fair.
Yeah, I mean, that's that. And one person did say, well, the basketball team's still practicing. I mean, that's a big difference. They're not in season. I mean, that's what makes it different.
It's absolutely different.
But the problem is that this is a team that, let's be honest. I mean, listen, Bob Stoops said it and Eric Stryker said it. This is more important than practice, and I understand that. However, this team needs to practice. I mean, they do. They were 8-5 last year. They have 4 new assistant coaches that are trying to get used to their players. They're installing an entirely new offense. They have a quarterback battle. This is potentially the most important off season of the Bob Stoops era. So they need to practice, and I think they need to get all 15 practices in.
Yeah, and I think they will. I mean, what do they have, 34 days? Is that right?
34 days, not counting spring break.
Yeah, and it doesn't count spring break. I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be able to get in these practices that they need to get into. And like I said, I didn't see much of a need for them after they didn't practice early last week to come back and practice on Wednesday and go through one practice and then have the break. Might as well just take the break, come back afterwards, fire up, and add those extra practices in later. Whether it's squeeze them in before the spring game or fill in a couple afterwards, which they've done in the past. They practiced usually, once or twice after the spring game?
Yeah. So, they were already planning on twice after the spring game this year, so they're going to have a little time to do that. I think maybe even an even bigger issue than getting them all in is spacing them out according to the rules, because 8 of these practices, I think, can be full pads. And you can't do those on back-to-back days. So they're going to have to really get creative with the way they do it.
Yeah. But I still think they're going to be able to do it. And what they've already got in 1 or 2 days without pads.
They won.
Well, so
they wore shoulder pads though.
Okay.
Shoulder pads and shorts. See, I don't know what all
they've got to come back with one more day without full pads.
Yeah.
And then they have to go one more day without full pads at some point during spring practice. It doesn't have to be just necessarily the third practice.
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting to see how all that works, particularly with, like I said, all the new coaches and the new offense. I mean, and the quarterbacks. That's, we talk about it every time we have a podcast is about the quarterbacks.
We've talked about that before?
because it's vital. It's perhaps the most important thing.
I don't think there's any perhaps about it.
And
quarterback play is going to be the most important thing for this team.
And so they've got to get all that worked out. They've got to figure out their not only the 4 new assistants, but you've got Cale Gundy and Jay Boulware and Mike Stoops changing the positions they're in charge of. It's a monumental offseason. It's huge. So there's really there is a need to get back to work, I think, for them. But again, I'm not criticizing what they've done, but they do need to get back to practice when they're back from spring break. I don't think they can afford to have another demonstration in place of practice. But one thing I thought that sort of occurred to me, with they're gonna practice in black for the rest of the spring, and I don't know whether that's going to carry over into the fall. But is this the catalyst for black alternate uniforms?
I think it could be. I think this conversation and the way that it's gone, and obviously the athletes have been sort of at the forefront of that on campus. I think it could lead to we see maybe the season opener next year against Akron.
Yeah,
they trot out black alternate uniforms. I would rather not see that. I think, as people have said, as Joe Castiglione said, Bob Stoops has said, OU's uniform in itself is pretty iconic in college football, and they toyed with that last year with the 2 alternates that they did wear, but there was still at least some calling back to history. Now, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with it if it's because of this and that's what they choose to do. I would hope it's just the one game that they use any kind of alternates for, one home game at least, that they use any kind of alternates for next year, and maybe do something different on the road at some point during the season. But it certainly opens the door.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my thought too. I mean, I am personally very much opposed to teams who use black uniforms when black is not part of their traditional.
As Uniwatch calls it, BFBS, black for black's sake.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like it. I think that it's pretty annoying actually when teams that have never had black in their uniform just trot it out. South Carolina did that. And there have been Texas A&M, didn't they do it?
I believe they did. Arkansas has done it. Although Arkansas calls it, as OU did last year, anthracite.
Oh, whatever. I'm not. No way. It's black, and so I'm not a fan of that traditionally, or typically. However, this time there's a little bit. There's a meaning behind it. So I could probably get behind it, just because of the larger meaning that isn't just we're gonna just throw black into our uniform just because. So
yeah, I'm absolutely with you there. I think there's a chance it happens, and if it does, I'm not gonna complain about it too much.
Well, we'll hold you to that. Ryan, I think that's about all the time we got for today. So thank you all so much for listening to the Nonfiction Writers. Ryan will be in Columbus, Ohio in a couple of days to cover the NCAA first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament. And we'll find out more, I guess, about the OU women tonight. Hopefully those of you hopefully that didn't throw you guys off too much if you're listening to this and are confused. But obviously be sure to stay with newsok.com every day and the Oklahoman every morning for the best OU coverage anywhere.